Hello loves, and welcome to the last video of 2023, my best books of the year. I am so excited to be sharing with you today the best books that I read this year. There are 15 books that I rated either a 4.75 or a perfect 5-star this year, and I am also going to include 5 honorable mentions from the 4.5-star rating category because they are the 5 books that, even though I rated them 4.5, I've still been thinking about. The first of the honorable mentions is Our House by Louise Candlish. This is a domestic thriller about a woman who returns from a business trip and finds someone else moving into her home. Her husband is gone, her kids are gone, and someone else is moving into her house. This is told between her perspective and her husband's perspective. Her perspective is the current events going on as she tries to figure out why her family is gone and her house has been sold, and then her husband's perspective, which tells a bit of the backstory as to how they got to that point. I thought that this was a really well done thriller, and it is one that I have been recommending to friends when they ask me for a thriller, so an honorable mention to this. It wasn't perfect by any means, but definitely a good recommendation for someone looking for a domestic thriller. Second honorable mention is How to Be Perfect, The Correct Answer to Every Moral Question by Michael Schur. This is an honorable mention as the best nonfiction book that I read this year. If you recognize the name Michael Schur, you might have seen the show The Good Place. The Good Place is a show that explores a lot of moral philosophy throughout its plot, and Michael Schur, as the creator of that show, had to do a lot of research into different moral stances to create the show. This book really explores his delving into moral philosophy from the perspective of someone who hasn't studied philosophy for his entire life. So it's really a layman's introduction to moral philosophy. I thought it was really well written in terms of being accessible to discussing such inaccessible topics such as moral philosophy, while also having a lot of anecdotes from the show. The Good Place is my comfort show. It's the show that I rewatch when I'm feeling blue, so I really enjoyed reading this and also getting to learn a bit more about moral philosophy. The next honorable mention, I'm going to sneak in 2 books here, and that is Legends and Lattes and Bookshops and Bone Dust. I read both of these got a 4.5. The series by Travis Baldree is about an orc who in the first book, Legends and Lattes, is retiring from the adventuring life to open a coffee shop in a fantasy city. And then in the prequel, Bookshops and Bone Dust, she is still an adventurer but is injured and temporarily is healing her injury while working in a bookshop. And these are just so cozy to read. While there is a bit of fantasy world building, the focus of these books is really the characters. So Viv as our main character, and the side characters are also well written. Thimble in Legends and Lattes is adorable. I want a little Thimble. And also in Bookshops and Bone Dust, Satchel, he's so cool. So I definitely would recommend these if you want a cozy fantasy story and some characters that you're going to absolutely love. Next is Monstrilio by Geraldo Somano Cordova. This is a monster horror novel about a woman whose son tragically dies young, and she learns of a folk tale where if you keep a piece of someone's organs, you can kind of preserve them. So she takes a piece of her son's lung and starts feeding it in a jar, and it grows and grows into Monstrilio, a little monster. This is a really good novel about the exploration of grief and loving someone even though they're flawed. I thought it was so well done, and I definitely have still been thinking about it since I finished it. So if you're looking for a horror novel that has a bit of depth to it in terms of analyzing grief and family dynamics, I would definitely recommend Monstrilio. And the last honorable mention as a book that I can't stop thinking about since I put it down, Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. First of all, a moment for the cover. I did have to order the UK version shipped to me because the Canadian cover is not it. The book is told between two perspectives, Leah and Miri. Leah was chosen to go on a submarine expedition, and when the submarine was deep down in the ocean, it lost power, and the submarine was considered lost for over 6 months. And she has just come back from being stuck at the bottom of the ocean for 6 months. And her wife, Miri, is the other perspective we get, and she has to adjust and deal with the fact that Leah came back from the submarine mission different. She has not been the same since she returned. There is a little bit of body horror regarding this book, but really it's an exploration of relationships, how they change over time, and grieving someone who's still there. So I have not been able to stop thinking about this book, and I definitely recommend it, not so much for the horror elements, but for really the human element of learning how to grieve. So those were the honorable mentions of 4.5 ratings that I am still thinking about after putting them down. And now we can move on to my top 15. In the 15th slot, we have The Body Snatchers by Jack Finney. This is a classic science fiction novel. In The Body Snatchers, a woman goes to her doctor because her uncle has been acting weird. He still looks the same. He still mostly acts the same, but there's just something off about his way of doing things. And as they go on, they find more and more people who are just a little bit off. And this is low down at 15 because there's some misogyny in the text, so I did knock some points off for that. But as a story, the plot, the intrigue, the characters, I loved all of it. I had so much fun with this. And this is also a short book, so if you're looking for one last book to crush in 2023, I can recommend picking this one up. I had a lot of fun with it, even if some of the language is a bit dated. It was originally written in 1955, so a product of its time, but still a really well-written book. Next is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. I honestly was surprised I even picked this up. I was on vacation and I wanted something light to listen to while doing some crosswords by the pool, and I was surprised that I loved this. In this book, there is a woman who has moved to New York and living with her roommates, but she doesn't really feel connected to anybody. And then she takes the subway and she sees the coolest looking woman she's ever seen. And it is a love story that plays out between this character and the person she meets on the subway, who turns out to be from the past. So it was a really good romance. Loved that. There was a little bit of spiciness, but not too much. But really, I loved the parts of the story that were about the main character bonding and growing her relationships and making herself a found family. One book that surprised me this year that I liked so much. Next at number 13 is The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This is a horror novel about a woman who wins the chance to go on a writing retreat with her all-time favorite author, along with a few other women, and turns out one of the other women that gets selected to go, it is their ex-friend that very dramatic falling out with. So she is stuck in this remote house with her ex-friend turned enemy, while also trying to write a novel that's good enough to impress her favorite author of all time. And then some spooky things start happening in the house. And I really enjoyed this book. There were some things in the story within a story that I thought were a bit weak, but the actual story itself, the novel, I thought was really well done. I was drawn in to both the characters' relationship drama as well as the mystery and thrills of what was going on in this house on this retreat. So I think it was really well done, and I believe this was a debut author, so I will definitely be looking forward to what this author can do next. Staying with the thriller vibes, next we have The Only One Left by Riley Sager. In this book, our main character is an in-home care nurse whose career is suffering because she's thought to have possibly killed her own mother, either through malicious intent or neglect, and the only job she can find is being the in-home nurse to a woman who, similar to Lizzie Borden, is accused of having killed her whole family, but there not being enough evidence to convict her for sure. So most of the people in town believe she did it. So this woman has isolated herself from everyone on her cliffside home and is now in the care of this in-home nurse. And there's kind of parallel stories being told here. There's the story of our main character and whether she actually killed her mom or not. And then also the story of the woman she's caring for and whether she actually killed her family or not. And I thought that it was really well written in the way that the stories paralleled each other, and I didn't see most of the twists coming. I thought the ending had a good wrap up, and I've not had the best experience with Riley Sager in the past, so I was pleasantly surprised to find a Riley Sager that I actually got the hype about. The next book on my list is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is a science fiction novel about our main character who wakes up from a coma on a spaceship and has no memory of why he's there and what he is needing to do on this spaceship. And as it unfolds and he regains his memory bit by bit, the story is told of how there was a threat to Earth and what this man specifically is meant to do about it. I really liked this. I like how Andy Weir explains the science behind things. I find that is written in a way that makes sense. And there's also a character that is introduced halfway through the novel who I love so much and really carried the book for me. And I thought that there was a good blend of science fiction explanations, some thrilling and mysterious parts of the story, and then also some really emotional parts. So overall, I really enjoyed Project Hail Mary, and this gets spot number 11 on my list. So now moving into the top 10, at the 10th place I have How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. This was a new release very early this year. I read most of Grady Hendrix books last year and loved basically all of them, and I was really excited to pick up something new. Sell a Haunted House is a horror novel about a woman whose parents have just died. She's moved away from her hometown, but she has to come back temporarily to help settle the estate, also deal with her slacker brother. This is not really a traditional ghost story. I didn't love this book for the horror. I loved it for the messy family dynamic. I love a family falling out over a death. I thought it was really emotional and well done in that aspect, even if the horror wasn't there. I just loved it. I had a good time with it. I laughed, I cried, I gave it 5 stars. It gets 10th place in my list. Number 9 is The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, or The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This is a murder mystery book with a bit of a twist that the character that we're following is trying to solve the murder of this woman at this fancy estate party. For every day he fails to solve the mystery, he has to relive the day from the perspective of a different attendee at this party. I thought it was a really clever way to unveil different characters' motivations and contributions to what happens in the mystery murder, while also having this kind of secondary extra layer to it that I found absolutely fascinating. So I really enjoyed this novel, and I definitely thought I had solved it a few times only for something else to come up that I hadn't considered, or for his actions in reliving the day to alter it. But I really enjoyed this, and I definitely want to check out more Stuart Turton next year. I think he has a new release coming out in 2024, so I am really looking forward to that. I really enjoyed the mystery. I thought it was so impeccably written as to how all the pieces fit together. If you want an Agatha Christie style mystery with a bit of a fantasy sci-fi twist, I definitely would recommend this one. Number 8, we have Vita Nostra by Marina and Sergei Dyanchenko. This is a translated novel in a series about our main character who is approached by a mysterious man and given a task to complete. And once she completes that task and a task after that, she is invited to attend this small, weird school in the countryside. And when she gets there, the textbook is incomprehensible. No one really knows what's going on. And then as she starts to study and study more, she starts to develop powers. I was hooked from the beginning of this book. I was on page 5 and it was like, I am fully in this. And it really paid off by the end. There's some parts that felt a bit slow, but then once you got there, it earned it. So definitely if you're looking for something with dark academia vibes, this is perfect. I have the sequel to this book in my TBR stack right now, and I'm so excited to get to it. It is a bit on the longer side, but definitely worth the payoff. So Vita Nostra, I definitely recommend picking up. Number 7 is The Last Word by Taylor Adams. This is a thriller book about a woman who is house sitting, and to pass the time, she's been reading a lot, and she reads this absolutely terrible book and gives it a 1-star rating because it was terrible, and explains why it was terrible in her review. And then she gets a reply from the author. And she pushes back. No, I'm not going to delete my review. Your book was terrible. And then some things start to happen, and someone breaks into the house. This is very classic, like, slasher thriller, but I thought it was so well done. The premise about someone coming after you for writing a low book review, a little tongue-in-cheek, clever for an author to do. I really enjoyed the twists and turns that happened. I just had fun with this one. When I read this, I was on a bad roll of very low to mid rated books, and this snapped me out of my reading slump. So thank you, Taylor Adams, for helping with that. And I would recommend picking up The Last Word if you're in a reading slump, because I found it very quick and easy to read and also intriguing enough to keep me going. So The Last Word by Taylor Adams gets place number 7 on this list. 6 on this list was so good I read it twice in the same month, and that is Subcutanean by Aaron A. Reed. The premise of the plot here is that 2 college friends find in the basement of their shared home this never-ending labyrinth, and they end up going through a door in a fridge and find themselves in a parallel world. And the really cool thing about this is I read 2 different copies of it, and the 2 different copies were different stories. While the setup is the same, if you buy a copy through the author's website, you get a unique copy of that book, where there are hundreds of places in the book where there are multiple options as to what happens. So you might have one copy of the book where your 2 friends are in a romantic relationship, and one where your 2 friends are kind of drifting apart. Or there might be a room that has a conversation pit, or there could be a room that has a swimming pool. There are so many different ways that these books can be different from each other, including whether or not your book lists what some of the differences are. And it is such a cool concept and such a fitting way to do it because it fits in with the book's themes of parallel worlds. And oh, I just had so much fun with this. So if you are going to pick up a copy, I recommend picking it up directly from the author's website so that you get a unique version of it, and then maybe buy more than one copy, because if you enjoy it the first time, or even if there's some things you would wish were different the first time, try a second copy and it might be fixed. So Subcutanean, such a unique experience. I definitely recommend it. Book number 5 is The Romance Recipe by Ruby Barrett. This is a queer romance book about a restaurant owner who is watching a cooking show, and she sees one of the contestants and is like, I need her for my restaurant. And so she slides into the DMs, and the contestant agrees to work in her restaurant. But the restaurant isn't doing too well financially, so she tries to convince the chef to go into another competition to be able to keep the restaurant afloat. And because it's a romance, they fall in love. There's a grumpy sunshine dynamic on both sides, kind of. And I had so much fun with it. It was steamy in places, it was cute in places, it was queer. I loved it. It was such a good time. So if you're looking for queer romance, I definitely recommend picking up The Romance Recipe by Ruby Barrett. Book number 4 in my top of the year was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This is a contemporary literary fiction book about two friends who had a falling out as they were children and then reconnect as adults and end up forming a video game company together. It really focuses on the way that the two main characters' relationship grows and changes as they grow and change as people throughout their life. I really loved that because the narrative focuses on a video game company, there's a lot of references to video games in here. I thought all the different aspects about game development were really interesting to read. And also I thought that the characters were really well written. They weren't perfect, they were flawed. They did things at times that were so frustrating, but I thought it was realistic and you could understand their motives as to why they were doing that. Also, the best character in this book, at some point, someone refers to him as Keanu Reeves. So I'm in, obviously. I love Keanu. And I thought that there were some really dramatic things that happened in this. I cried multiple times reading it, and it takes a lot for a book to make me cry. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, book number 4 of my favorite of the year. My third favorite book of the year, Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I haven't read any other R.F. Kuang. I have it on my list, I haven't gotten to it, but this was a book club pick, so I had to kind of prioritize reading it first. And when I tell you, I could not put this book down. It is about our white protagonist who happens to be in her Asian friend's apartment when her Asian friend dies. And she just happens to see her friend's manuscript sitting on the desk in her office while the EMTs are rolling out her dead body. And so she just takes that and submits it to her own agent as her own work, even though the story is about Chinese laborers during World War I. So from there, our main character is trying to keep secret the fact that she stole someone else's manuscript, while her publisher is trying to make it okay to the public that a white woman write a book about Chinese characters. I hated the main character, but I thought it was so well done that you are reading a book from the perspective of a character that you hate, but you're still drawn in. You're still not throwing the book across the room, or at least I wasn't. And God, she was the worst. But I was so intrigued by the narrative. I was so interested in all of the behind the scenes publishing drama. I loved it so much. I had so much fun with this, and definitely could see some parallels to some real world drama that's happened. Book number 2 is one that I read like the second week of the year, and I have not been able to stop thinking, and that is Bunny by Mona Awad. What to say about this book? Our main character is in a master's program at a university, and in her same program there is this clique called the Bunnies, and she kind of looks down on them. She doesn't want to be a part of their group, and then one day they invite her to be part of their group, and I like the weird culty vibes that the Bunnies have, and the development of our main character over time, going from hating the bunnies to being a bunny. And there's also some weird dark academia mysticism going on. I ate this up. Another book that I couldn't put down, I was reading from start to finish because I was so intrigued to figure out what the heck was going on in this book, and I loved it. It was so good. And my absolute best book of the year, which 1 is a 2023 release and 2 is a debut, Maeve Fly by CJ Lead. What to say about this book? Okay, Maeve Fly is about our main character Maeve, and by day she's a Disney princess, by night she has some dark ass fantasies, and they don't stay fantasies for very long. This book has the best hockey romance I have ever read in my life. Some cringy violence that made my skin crawl, but I still could not put it down. And a really good analysis of that period in your 20s when your friends are starting to grow up and have big ambitions and actually take on more responsibility, and you feel that they might leave you behind. And I don't want to say I related to a character who, some of the things she does, but I felt that. I felt it so bad. And stunning cover, amazingly written, stunning plot, stunning characters, stunning romance. I also got legitimately jump scared by this book just because the chapter designs have a fly that's drawn somewhere on the page, and it wasn't where I was expecting it to be when I turned the page, and I thought there was a bug in my book. So even the chapter art is scary. So that is a roundup of the 15 best books and 5 honorable mentions that I read in 2023. Thank you so much for watching. Leave down in the comments below which books I should read in 2024 because they were your best of 2023, and have a happy new year and see y'all next year.